Welcome back to Star Wars Elseworlds. At the end of episode 1 of The Mandalorian, Din Djarin saved Grogu by shooting the IG droid in the head, thus saving him and going on a journey to reunite Grogu with his kind. The rest, as we know, is history. But what if things took a dark turn? What if IG-11 had actually killed the child right there and then? What would happen afterwards? How would this change in the timeline affect Din Djarin's story and the other characters associated with Grogu? For this what if story, I want to delve into a very short, ultra-realistic version of this scenario and the consequences that would follow, instead of my usual in-depth, long narrative fanfictions. So by nature, this story will be very dark. So let's enter an alternate universe of the Star Wars timeline, an Elseworlds, on what if IG-11 killed Grogu. Our story begins at the Nikto hideout, located on Arvala 7. As Din and IG-11 approach the pod where the child had been stored, IG-11 and Din speak briefly, like in the scene as Grogu revealed himself from his blanket. Just as IG-11 stated that the asset must be terminated, without a second of waiting, the droid proceeded to shoot Grogu point blank in the face, much sooner in this timeline, which didn't give Din a chance to react and shoot the droid first. Once the blaster shot was fired, Grogu's face was completely melted. His ears and hands twitched violently in a both horrifying yet disgusting scenery that even made the Mandalorian turn his head away for a brief moment. Din argued with the IG droid, berating it for murdering an innocent child in cold blood. This further sparked his already established hatred and mistrust for droids. He approached the dead child in hopes of seeing if he could be revived, but it was no use. The grotesque scenery of Grogu's brains and head being splattered in his pod made the Mandalorian sick to his stomach. He could have prevented this child from being killed, but failed him, and the consequences of that failure will soon haunt him. In the following episode of The Mandalorian, there are slight changes. In the beginning, when Din was walking through the desert cave in chapter 2, he is not attacked by the Trandoshan hunters, since Grogu is dead here. In the original timeline, they were hunting Grogu down with the tracking fob seen in the episode after Din killed them. So with the death of the child, Din was able to walk safely through the cave alone. All that dwelled on his mind was how he could have reacted sooner to save the child. This is something that haunted him for the following days. Later into the night, Din sat down in front of the campfire fixing the chest piece of his armor. He continued to ponder with the guilt of not being able to save Grogu. The next day, when Din spotted the Jawas who had taken parts of his ship, he proceeded to attack them. The rest played out how it normally did. He went after them, but was knocked off the sandcrawler. He returned to his ship only to find it completely raided. Din arrived to Kuel's farm, where the two spoke. We then cut to the following day, as Kuel took Din to the Jawas to negotiate, and it's here where he agreed to grab the Mudhorn egg for them, in exchange for the parts of his ship to be returned. Din confronted the Mudhorn, and they fought. The obvious key difference in this universe is that with Grogu dead, he wouldn't be present to lift the beast, thus giving Din the opening to kill it and retrieve the egg, but most importantly, saving his life. So here he is eventually killed with a crushing blow by the Mudhorn, after a few fatal attacks. Failing to save the child led to his brutal death, which is a realistic outcome if we take away plot convenience. Now, of course, there are many ways to write a version of this story where Din could have survived and continue on his journey, but for the sake of maintaining realism and the nature of this dark fanfiction on a cause and effect basis, I believe Din dying here is appropriate. Many days later, Jawa snuck up on his rotting corpse in front of the Mudhorn's cave to strip Din of his armor and weapons, long after she's secluded in her nest. His valuables would remain in their sandcrawler for many years to come. His body rotted away days later in the mud, and this is the end of The Mandalorian. Without the egg in the Jawa's possession, the Razor Crest would die with Din Djarin. Kuel would continue on with his life and wouldn't die in chapter 7 of season 1, since he wouldn't have gotten involved in helping Grogu with Mando and the others. With Grogu and the Mandalorian dead, this meant that Din never met Cara Dune, and the villagers never get the help they needed from them, which means they would continue to get attacked by the pirates. The young bounty hunter in chapter 5 never got help from Din, so he would easily be killed by Fennec Shand. once he decided to go after her alone, or he could have possibly died by the Sand People. This means that Fennec Shand wouldn't have needed to be saved by Boba Fett, as she wouldn't have been shot by the young bounty hunter. With that in mind, Fennec wouldn't have met Boba Fett this soon, possibly. Boba would get his armor back by force, stripping it off of Cobb Vanth instead. The children of the Watch on Navarro are never forced to reveal themselves, so they stay hidden in the shadows, underground. Eventually, Moff Gideon had Grogu's body tracked down and sent to him for whatever sinister plans he had, now that he can use Grogu's blood without any issues. Ahsoka never met Grogu and Din, and neither does Luke. There isn't much material to explore that involved Din and Grogu, so this story just covers what we've already seen, and this is the end of this story. I wanted to write a short story covering the cause and effects of Grogu being killed in the very first episode of The Mandalorian. The nature of a story like this would lead to dark and drastic consequences in the long run. These events is what I believe would happen, at least in this version of the story. This is the first time I've written a story like this where it's not really a long, in-depth narrative, so I may do more in the future. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.